So all these different types of contracts are going to deal with rights, the rights to the copyrights, the rights to the music, the rights to the composition, the rights to the sound recording. They're all going to deal with control of those rights. Who controls what happens to the composition? Who gets to control where we do with those recordings? And obviously, it will deal with money. Right? How do we deal with who gets the money, in what percentages, how often are we paid, how are we paid? All that should be in these contracts. So we think about who owns the rights, think about who controls the rights, think about who gets paid and when. The most simple document is going to be a split sheet. So this primarily deals with songwriting, with owning a composition. All this is a document that says name of the song, name of the writers, percentage each writer owns, sign at the bottom. Really simple, saves a lot of heartache in the long run, because if you're writing songs all day, every day, or all day for a week, you're not necessarily going to remember who wrote this part or that part. Really important to get it down when it's fresh in your mind, and can be a super simple spreadsheet or just piece of paper, whatever, as long as it has that basic information and a signature. So use split sheets if you're co-writing with folks, if at all possible. More complicated version of this is a co-author agreement. Same idea, we're co-writing with someone, or maybe we're co-recording with someone, but it has more details about control and money, because as I said at the very beginning, when multiple people own a copyright, any one of them can go and use that copyright without permission of the other. So if Barb and I write a song together, and I'm thinking, oh, this song is perfect for film, I'm not going to put it on the radio, I'm going to save it for a film, Barb can say, nah, I'm going to put this on the radio. And I can't stop her unless we have a co-author agreement that says, we agree, neither of us will put it out there until we both, unless we agree that we're both putting it out there. Or it has to go out on film before it can go on the radio, whatever it is. We talk about how we control those rights. We also talk about how we get paid, because if I get a bunch of money from the song that Barb and I wrote, I have to pay her some of it. How often do I have to pay her? Do I give her an accounting? Or all these things that you want to put in writing if possible, so that down the road, maybe we write this song together and maybe we both kind of put it away and we don't think about it for years and years, and 10 years from now, this song blows up and is making tons of money. And we've totally forgotten, like, what did we say about that? What's the splits and who controls and how do you get paid? So putting these things in writing, really helpful. And again, does not have to be complicated. Also, by the way, applies to co-writing, also applies to, we're all in the studio together, right? There's 5 musicians in the studio. We're all creating a sound recording. Well, we're all going to by default, we all own that sound recording. So let's agree who gets to control what goes out in the world, who collects the money, who pays out the money. If we're a band, that may be part of our band agreement, but let's think about these things as we're creating copyrights and putting it in writing, so that we won't have a lapse of memory, right? We're not going to have different versions of the story. We have it in writing. There's no argument about it, okay? Now, one thing I know, I saw somewhere in the chat, someone brought up work for hire. Very important document, very common in the arts and very common in music. What a work for hire means is an artist is hired to create a work and gives up the ownership of that work. So going back to me going to the studio and hiring a bunch of horns to play on the track, I don't want the horn players that I'm never going to see again to own part of my copyright. So I'm going to pay them as a work for hire. I'm going to say, I'm hiring you to do this work. I own the work. This must be in writing. Can't just handshake work for hire. Doesn't work that way. Has to be in writing. We need a document. That document's going to say, I hired Tommy the tuba player to play tuba on my track. I paid Tommy $100. It's a work for hire. I own it. And I own it from inception. I don't even have to, I can credit him, but I don't have to. It means he never even had ownership. As soon as he created it, it was mine. because it's a work for hire. But we want to think about this in advance, because if I hire Tommy, I pay him $100, and then a few months later I say, hey, by the way, that was work for hire. Will you sign this? He'd say, I didn't think that was work for hire. Well, now we're too late. Technically, a work for hire has to be agreed upon when or before we create that copyright. Now, we can sign work for hire agreements after the fact. I can say, Tommy, here's your $100. I'm going to own this. It's a work for hire. I'll get you the contract later. I can give him the contract a few months from now. Totally fine. But we can't just suddenly change the deal and make it a work for hire. What we can do down the road is have a written transfer. We can say, okay, Tommy, I didn't mention it's a work for hire, but do you mind giving me the rights? And he can say, yeah, sure. And we'll do a transfer. Technically not a work for hire. This is a bit of a legal technicality, but still important. If you're doing work for hire, do it in advance. Down the road, we can do an assignment. Again, must be in writing. So important contracts to make sure we know what we own, who owns what, and who, where those rights are going to go. Last type of agreement I will talk about is a producer agreement. A lot of us either are producers or are hiring producers. And I see a lot of producer agreements come up kind of after the fact, which I understand, but we still want to make sure we have a producer agreement, because producers usually in the studio, producers often, maybe they're helping us write, or they're helping us touch up the writing a little bit. Maybe they're playing on the track, or they're contributing to the creation of our copyrights. We need a producer agreement to say, producer does not own those copyrights. Artist owns those copyrights. Really important. Need a producer agreement to say, well, is the producer just mixing? Are they mixing and mastering? Are they what is the producer doing? Need a producer agreement to say when they're going to deliver those tracks, whether they're mixed or mastered or whatever. We don't want it taking months and years. So let's be careful about what's the producer going to do? When are they going to do it? And then the revenue part of this, okay, is about how a producer gets compensated. Producers often get paid per track or per a flat fee, but we often talk about producer points. And producer points are very commonly misunderstood, so I want to make sure to talk about them. Producer points are a way to pay a producer a percentage, okay? But it's a antiquated system where a point is a percentage of the retail price. Producer gets 3 points. That means they're getting 3% of the retail price. So I go and sell a CD for $10, producer's going to get 30 cents. We don't sell a lot of CDs anymore. Not a lot of retail going on in music. Now, the money that we get from the streaming services, technically, we can call that our retail price. But it doesn't really work that way with a lot of the ways we generate revenue. So we do points with producers all the time. I'm not saying we don't do points, but just keep in mind how we calculate points, because you can also do producer payment as a percentage of revenue, percentage of net revenue, ideally. We're going to say, okay, producer's going to get 10% of my net, which means gross minus expenses, okay? But that's going to include things like sync, and those distribution fees are going to be easier, or distribution revenues are going to be easier to track and pay out the producer than calculating a percentage of the retail price.